Have you ever looked around and realized how much the world has changed? The things we once knew, skills that were second nature, are now becoming rare. Many of us grew up in a time when fixing things, making things from scratch, and doing things by hand were just part of life. But today, most people wouldn't know where to start. In this video, we're diving into 7 lost skills that are disappearing fast. Some of these might bring back memories, and some might make you wonder, can you still do them? Stay with me until the end, and let's see how many of these skills you still remember. Now, let's get started. 1. Writing letters by hand, a lost artwork. Remembering, there was a time when writing letters by hand was not just a necessity, but a cherished tradition, a deeply personal way of staying connected with loved ones. Before emails and instant messages took over, people would sit down at their desks, pick out their best stationery, and carefully craft a letter, knowing that every word carried a part of them. The process itself was special, choosing the right pen, feeling the smoothness of the paper, and watching the ink dry as thoughts flowed from the heart onto the page. Each letter was unique, filled with personality, emotion, and a sense of sincerity that modern communication often lacks. Unlike a quick text message or an email that can be typed and deleted in seconds, a handwritten letter took time, effort, and thought, making it feel like a gift rather than just a message. There was something magical about receiving a letter in the mail, pulling it from the envelope, unfolding the paper, and reading words that had traveled miles to reach you. The handwriting alone told a story. Whether it was the neat, carefully written script of a mother, the bold strokes of a friend, or the slightly shaky handwriting of a grandparent, each letter was a piece of the person who wrote it. The scent of the paper, the occasional ink smut, and even the imperfections in the handwriting made it feel alive, as if the writer was right there with you. Letters were more than just words on a page. They were moments frozen in time, capturing feelings that could be revisited over and over again. Unlike digital messages that can be lost with a single click, letters were kept, treasured, and sometimes even tied with a ribbon and stored in a special box. Some people still have old letters from decades ago, written by parents, grandparents, or even childhood friends, holding on to them as precious reminders of the past. There was a sense of anticipation when sending a letter, knowing that it would take days or even weeks to reach its destination, and then waiting for a reply. Unlike today's instant communication, where messages are read and responded to in seconds, handwritten letters required patience. But that waiting made them even more meaningful, because when you finally received a response, it felt like a true connection, as if the writer had taken the time to sit down and speak to you personally. Writing letters was an art form in itself, a way of expressing emotions that often felt deeper and more thoughtful than anything typed on a screen. Love letters carried the weight of real emotion, pouring out feelings that were sometimes too difficult to say aloud. Letters from soldiers to their families during wartime were lifelines of hope and love, cherished by those waiting for their safe return. Friends separated by distance would share their lives in pages filled with stories, dreams, and everyday happenings, making them feel closer despite the miles between them. Even thank you notes and birthday cards were once written with care, showing appreciation in a way that a simple text message never could. In a world where everything moves so fast, where conversations disappear in a scroll of endless notifications, handwritten letters were a way to slow down and truly connect. They were more than just communication. They were keepsakes, memories, and pieces of history passed down through generations. Today, receiving a handwritten letter is rare, almost like finding a hidden treasure. When was the last time you wrote a letter to someone? Not an email, not a text, but an actual letter sealed in an envelope and sent through the mail. Imagine the joy of someone opening a letter from you, knowing that you took the time to sit down, put pen to paper, and write something just for them. Maybe it's time to bring back this lost art, to rediscover the beauty of handwriting, and to remind ourselves that sometimes the simplest gestures hold the most meaning. So, pick up a pen, find some paper, and write a letter to someone you care about. You never know, years from now, they might still have it, tucked away safely, a piece of you preserved in ink and memory. 2. Memorizing phone numbers, a lost skill we never thought we'd forget. There was a time when memorizing phone numbers was just a normal part of life. Everyone did it without thinking, and yet today, most of us can barely remember our own number, let alone anyone else's. Think back to the days when your brain brain was your contact list. You didn't have a smartphone storing hundreds of numbers for you. You had to actually remember them. If you wanted to call your best friend, your parents, your workplace, or even the local pizza shop, you had to keep their numbers locked in your memory. It wasn't hard either. Somehow, we just knew them. We dialed them so often that they became second nature. And if we did forget, well, we had a little black address book where we carefully wrote down every important number just in case. It was a different world back then, one where remembering phone numbers was a sign of responsibility, independence, and, in some cases, even love. Think about it. Back in the day, if someone knew your number by heart, it meant you were important to them. If a friend or a loved one could dial your number without looking it up, it showed they cared enough to keep you in their memory. In a way, knowing someone's number was a connection in itself. Parents made sure their kids knew their home number in case of emergencies. Couples memorized each other's numbers because it was a daily necessity. And if you got a new number, well, you had to call everyone and tell them, hoping they'd remember it just as easily as the old one. It wasn't uncommon for people to rattle off entire lists of phone numbers without hesitation. Home numbers, work numbers, neighbors' numbers. It was all there, stored in our minds like a second nature. And let's not forget the thrill of dialing a number on a rotary phone, the way you had to spin the dial and wait for it to return before entering the next digit. It made you really think about the numbers you were dialing. There was no speed dial, no shortcuts. If you dialed a wrong number, you had to hang up and start all over again. This meant you paid attention. Every number had to be precise, and because dialing took effort, it made memorizing numbers even easier. You used them often, and repetition locked them into your brain. Public payphones were another reason why we had to memorize numbers. If you were out and needed to call home, you had to either remember the number or carry a small paper with important numbers written down. You couldn't just press a contact name on a screen. You had to insert a coin, dial each digit, and wait for the call to connect. And what about collect calls? If you didn't have change, you could call collect and quickly say your name as a message. Something like, "Hey mom, pick me up at the mall," before the operator cut you off. It was a little trick that saved you a few coins, and somehow parents always understood. There was also a sense of accomplishment in memorizing numbers. It felt good to know you could recall a number instantly without looking it up. It gave you confidence, made you feel sharp. It was a skill that kept your mind active. Kids were taught to memorize emergency numbers, 911, their home number, maybe even a relative's number, just in case. If they ever got lost or needed help, they knew exactly who to call. Today, if you ask a child what their home phone number is, chances are they don't know. Why? Because they don't need to. Everything is stored in a phone. Technology slowly took over, and with each advancement, our need to memorize numbers faded away. First came speed dial, where we could assign numbers to a single button. Then came cell phones, where we could scroll through contacts and call people with a simple tap. And finally, smartphones eliminated the need entirely. Now we don't even have to dial. We just say, "Call mom," and the phone does the rest. It's convenient, yes, but it also means we've lost something valuable. Our brains no longer work the way they used to. We've outsourced our memory to technology, and in doing so, we've let go of a skill that once felt so natural. The real test comes when we lose our phone. Suddenly, we're stranded. We can't call anyone because we don't know their number. The only numbers most people still remember are the ones they learned before smartphones took over. Maybe their childhood home number or their grandparents' landline. Everything else, gone. It's in the phone, locked behind a screen we can't access. It's funny, isn't it? We have the world's knowledge at our fingertips, yet we can't remember something as simple as a phone number. In the past, memorizing numbers was part of everyday life, but today, it almost feels like a superpower. If you still remember your childhood best friend's phone number, you're one of the few who held on to a piece of the past. Maybe it's time we challenge ourselves again. Try memorizing just a few important numbers. Your spouse's, your parents', your closest friends. You never know when you might need them. And who knows? Maybe in doing so, you'll feel a little bit of that old sense of independence, that quiet confidence that comes from knowing you don't need a screen to stay connected. Technology is incredible, but some things, like the ability to remember a phone number, are worth holding on to. So what about you? Do you still remember any phone numbers from the past? Let us know in the comments. 3. Fixing things instead of replacing them. There was a time when throwing something away was the last option, not the first. If something broke, you fixed it. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about pride, resourcefulness, and making things last. Whether it was a toaster that stopped working, a pair of shoes with worn-out soles, or a radio that lost its signal, people didn't rush to replace them. They rolled up their sleeves, grabbed a toolbox, and got to work. Every home home had a sewing kit, a drawer full of spare screws and bolts, and a mindset that said, I can fix this. A torn shirt wasn't trash. It was a simple sewing job. A wobbly chair wasn't useless. It just needed a nail or two. And if the TV wasn't working, well, sometimes a good whack on the side did the trick. People knew the value of things, and they knew that a little effort could bring something back to life. There were repair shops on every corner, shoemakers who could make old boots look new, radio and TV repairmen who could bring a dead set back to life, and tailors who could make clothes fit perfectly again. Appliances weren't designed to be disposable. They were built to last, and when they broke, there were replacement parts available to keep them running. It was common to see dads at the kitchen table fixing a broken toy, or grandpas in the garage tuning up an old lawnmower. And it wasn't just about saving money. It was about the satisfaction of knowing you could take care of what you own. There was a sense of accomplishment in tightening that last screw, patching that last tear, rewiring that old lamp. It felt good to bring something back to life with your own hands. Even kids got involved, learning from their parents, watching how to change a bike tire, how to mend a hole in their jeans, or how to fix a leaky faucet with a little plumber's tape. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Products became cheaper to replace than to repair. Companies started making things that weren't meant to last. Phones that couldn't be opened, appliances with parts that were impossible to find, and clothes that wore out faster than ever before. It became easier to buy new than to fix the old, and the repair shops started disappearing one by one. Today, when something breaks, most people don't even think twice before tossing it out and buying a replacement. It's faster, it's more convenient, and let's face it, many people wouldn't even know where to start if they wanted to fix something. The skills that once kept households running are fading away, and so is the sense of pride that came with them. But every now and then, you meet someone who still believes in fixing things. Maybe it's a grandfather who refuses to throw away a perfectly good chair just because it's a little wobbly. Maybe it's a mom who still patches up her kids' clothes instead of buying new ones. Or maybe it's someone who just loves the challenge of taking something broken and making it work again. And when they do, there's something deeply satisfying about it, because fixing something just about saving money. It's about valuing what you have, respecting craftsmanship, and knowing that with a little effort, you can make things last. Maybe it's time we bring back that mindset. Maybe it's time to stop throwing things away so easily and start remembering the joy of fixing them. After all, there's something special about using something you've repaired with your own two hands, something you just don't get from a brand new replacement. Making and receiving collect calls. There was a time when making a long-distance call wasn't as simple as pulling out your phone and tapping the contact. Back in the day, if you needed to call someone but didn't have any money for a payphone, you had one option, making a collect call. It was a system that let the person on the other end decide whether they wanted to accept the charges. And let me tell you, it was a real gamble. Imagine picking up the phone and hearing an operator say, "You have a collect call from," followed by someone hurriedly saying their name before the beep. Sometimes it was a genuine emergency. Other times, it was just a creative way to send a quick message without paying for the call. People got sneaky with it too. Instead of saying their actual name, they'd squeeze an entire message into the name section, like "Mom picked me up out of the mall," or "It's done, come home now." That way, the person on the other end could just decline the call and still get the message for free. It was like the original version of texting, only with a lot more effort involved. Collect calls weren't just for casual conversations, though. Back when long-distance calls were expensive, families relied on them to stay in touch. If a relative lived far away, you wouldn't just call them anytime you felt like that. No, you had to plan it out. Sometimes people would set a specific time to expect a collect call and only accept if they were ready. And let's not forget the role of operators in all of this. Unlike today, where everything is automated, back then you had a real person connecting the call. You'd tell them the number, they'd dial it for you, and then they'd ask the recipient if they wanted to accept the charges. It was a process, but it was all we had. Sometimes, if you were lucky, the operator would be extra helpful, maybe even giving you a little hint if the person you were calling wasn't home. Payphones played a huge role in collect calls too. If you were out somewhere and needed to call home, you'd hunt for the nearest payphone, dig through your pockets for change. And if you came up empty, well, it was time to call collect. You'd stand there hoping the person you were calling wasn't in a bad mood, because if they didn't accept, you were out of luck. And let's not forget how public the whole thing was. Standing in a crowded place, trying to have a conversation while people walk by, staring at you like you were an alien. If you were lucky, the phone booth offered some privacy, but most of the time, you just had to talk fast and hope nobody was eavesdropping. Businesses used collect calls too, especially truck drivers and traveling salesmen. Before cell phones, if they needed to check in with the office or their families. Collect calls were the way to go. Some companies even had specific policies for how to handle them, accepting only certain calls or using secret codes in the caller's name to know if it was work-related. It was a whole system built around avoiding those expensive phone bills. Speaking of expensive, making a collect call wasn't cheap. The person accepting the call usually ended up paying way more than a regular call would cost. That's why people didn't take collect calls lightly. If you got one, you had to decide in a split second, was this important enough to pay for, or was someone just trying to get a free conversation? If you were on a budget, accepting a collect call could mean cutting back on something else that month. It sounds silly now, but back then, every phone bill mattered. Of course, as technology advanced, collect calls started to fade away. Calling cards came along, letting people prepay for long-distance calls. Then cell phones took over, making it easier and cheaper to stay in touch. And now, well, it's almost unheard of. When was the last time you even thought about making a collect call? Most young people today wouldn't even know what to do when they saw a payphone, let alone how to call collect. The idea of having to rely on an operator to make a call sounds like something from another world. But for those of us who lived through it, collect calls were just a part of life. They were how we stayed connected, how we let people know we were okay, and sometimes how we got out of a tight spot when we didn't have any change in our pockets. They were inconvenient, expensive, and sometimes downright frustrating, but they were also a little piece of history, a reminder of a time when communication wasn't instant and every call had a little more meaning. So, do you remember making or receiving collect calls? Maybe you had a clever trick to avoid paying, or maybe you still remember that sinking feeling when an unexpected collect call came in. Either way, those days are gone, but the memories, those are worth it. 5. Playing outside until dark without a phone. There was a time when childhood was filled with adventure, imagination, and the great outdoors. Back then, kids didn't sit inside staring at screens or scrolling through social media. There were no endless notifications, no video calls, and certainly no GPS tracking. Instead, the only rule was simple: be home before the streetlights came on. That was our signal, the universal unspoken curfew that every kid knew by heart. From the moment we woke up to the moment the sky turned pink and orange, we were outside, running, laughing, and living. Morning started with a quick breakfast and a mad dash out the door. No one needed to text their friends to make plans. You just showed up at their house, knocked on the door, and asked, "Can you come out and play?" If they weren't home, you moved on to the next house. And sooner or later, a group of kids had gathered, ready to take on the day. We played everything: tag, hide and seek, hopscotch, jump rope, and Red Rover. We raced our bikes up and down the street, feeling like champions as the wind rushed past our faces. We built forts out of sticks and leaves, dug holes in the dirt pretending to search for treasure. We climbed trees as if we were explorers, discovering a new world. There were no helmets, no knee pads, just scraped elbows and grass-stained knees. But we didn't care. A little dirt and a few bruises were proof of a good day. Water came from the garden hose, and we all agreed it had the best taste in the world. If you were thirsty, you didn't run inside. You just turned on the hose, took a sip, and passed it to the next kid in line. And if you happened to spray someone in the process, well, that just turned into another game. Summers were the best. Sprinklers became water runs, and the ice cream truck was the highlight of the afternoon. You could hear the faint jingle from blocks away, and the second that sound hit your ears, it was a full-on sprint to find enough loose change to buy a popsicle or a drumstick. Some kids had allowances, but most of us just relied on whatever coins we could scrounge up. A few pennies, a couple of nickels, and maybe if you were lucky, a quarter. The sound of that ice cream truck meant pure happiness. And if you didn't have enough money, sometimes a friend would spot you, and you'd promise to pay them back in some way. Maybe by letting them have the best swing at the playground, or giving them a turn on your bike. Rain didn't stop us either. Instead of hiding indoors, we ran outside barefoot, splashing in puddles, letting the raindrops soak our clothes. Mud became our playground, and worms became our unexpected playmates. When the storm finally passed, we'd look for the biggest puddles and jump right in, knowing full well that we'd get scolded for ruining our shoes. But it was worth it, and when the sun came back out, drying the streets and warming our faces, we were ready for another round of adventure. There were no phones buzzing in our pockets. No one had to take a selfie or post a status update about what they were doing. The only updates were the stories we told our parents when we finally dragged ourselves inside at the end of the day, exhausted but happy. We found a turtle near the creek, or we built the tallest tree house ever, or you won't believe how far I rode my bike today. These were the things that mattered. We lived in the moment because there was nothing else to distract us. As the sun began to set, the sky turning shades of purple and red, we knew our time was running out. One by one, the streetlights flickered flickered on, and we all knew what that meant. It was time to head home. Some parents called out names from the front porch, while others relied on that simple, unspoken rule. The walk home was always slow, feet dragging, wishing for just a few more minutes. But as soon as we stepped through the front door, we realized how tired we were. Our legs ached, our hands were dirty, and our clothes were covered in dust and grass stains. But our hearts, they were full. We didn't realize it then, but those days were special. They shaped who we were. They taught us independence, creativity, and how to have fun without needing constant entertainment. We learned how to solve problems without asking Google, how to settle arguments without a referee, and how to entertain ourselves with nothing but our imagination. We weren't glued to screens. We were glued to each other, to the world around us, to the simple joys of being young and free. Now, when we see kids with their eyes locked onto their phones, sitting inside on a beautiful day, we can't help but feel like they're missing something. Not just fresh air or exercise, but a kind of freedom that can't be replicated, a kind of adventure that can't be downloaded. Sure, times change, technology moves forward, but there's something about the way we grew up that feels irreplaceable. It was a time when childhood was about experience, not entertainment, when the only notifications we got were our friends calling our names from the sidewalk, waiting for us to come outside and play. So do you remember? Do you miss it? If you could go back just for one more summer evening, would you? Because I know I would. 6. Using a map to get somewhere before GPS and smartphones. Getting from one place to another wasn't as simple as typing an address into a screen and following a robotic voice. Instead, we relied on good old-fashioned paper maps. Big, fold-out maps that never seemed to fold back the right way once you opened them. If you were planning a trip, you might have had a road atlas in the car, filled with pages of highways, back roads, and tiny towns you had never heard of. Every turn, every route, every possible detour had to be figured out ahead of time, or you'd risk getting completely lost. And if you were really serious about your trip, you might have even sat down the night before with a highlighter, tracing your path so you wouldn't miss an important turn. But even with the best planning, things didn't always go smoothly. Sometimes you'd miss a turn and end up miles away from where you were supposed to be, staring at road signs that weren't on your map. That's when you had to do something that people today rarely ever do. Pull over at a gas station and ask for directions. You'd step inside, where a friendly attendant, often with a thick accent or a folksy way of talking, would either scribble instructions on the back of a receipt or point vaguely in the direction you needed to go. Just head down this road a bit. Take a left at the old church, then go straight till you see the big red barn. Can't miss it. And somehow, even though the instructions sounded like a riddle, they usually were. But maps weren't just for long trips. Even in your own city, you might have kept a map in the glove compartment for those times when you needed to find a new restaurant, a friend's house, or a doctor's office. And if you lived in a big city, you might have had a thick, spiral-bound street directory that was practically an encyclopedia of every road, alley, and shortcut. Of course, reading a map while driving was its own challenge. If you had a passenger, they'd usually take on the role of navigator, unfolding the map across their lap, squinting at tiny print and calling out directions, sometimes too late, leading to a sharp turn or a last-second lane change. And if you were driving alone, well, you might have pulled over at a stoplight, tried to glance at the map on your steering wheel, or, in a truly desperate moment, attempted to read while cruising down the highway, a risky move that probably led to more than a few missed exits. But despite all the challenges, using a map gave people a sense of adventure. You had to pay attention to where you were going, look for landmarks, and actually think about your surroundings. You couldn't just blindly follow a voice telling you to turn left in 500 feet. Instead, you learned how to recognize key roads, remember street names, and develop a natural sense of direction. And there was a real satisfaction in successfully navigating to your destination, knowing that you got there using your own skills, not a digital assistant. Some people even enjoyed collecting maps, keeping old ones as souvenirs of past trips. A well-used map might have coffee stains, creases from being folded and refolded, and little notes scribbled in the margins. Great diner here, beware of potholes, or best view at sunset. Today, GPS has made things easier, but maybe a little less interesting too. When you don't have to think about where you're going, you don't pay as much attention to the journey itself. You don't stumble upon hidden gems or take unexpected detours that lead to unforgettable experiences. And you certainly don't have the thrill of unfolding a map, tracing your route with a finger, and setting off on an adventure with only your instincts and a piece of paper to guide you. So, do you remember the days of using maps? Did you ever get completely lost and have to find your way back the hard way? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. 7. Recording songs from the radio. The struggle was real, but oh the joy. Do you remember the days when recording songs from the radio was an event? It wasn't as simple as clicking a button or creating a playlist like today. No, back then, if you wanted to listen to your favorite song whenever you pleased, you had to work for it. You had to sit by your radio, cassette tape loaded and ready, fingers hovering over the record and play buttons, waiting for the DJ to finally stop talking and let the music play. And oh, the frustration when they decided to talk right through the intro of the song. It was a delicate operation, a mix of patience, skill, and luck. If you timed it just right, you'd get a clean recording. Well, almost. Most of the time, the song had a little bit of the DJ's voice at the beginning or end, but that was just part of the charm. And if the phone rang, a sibling barged into the room, or your mom called you for dinner right at the wrong moment, disaster. You had to wait for the song to come on again, which could take hours or even days. But that didn't stop us. We kept at it because having that song on tape meant freedom. Freedom to listen to it anytime, anywhere, without waiting for the radio to play it again. And let's talk about mixtapes. Oh, the power of a mixtape. If you wanted to impress someone, show a friend you cared, or capture the mood of a summer night, you made a mixtape. Not just any mixtape, it had to be carefully curated. Every song chosen with meaning, recorded in just the right order. It wasn't like making a playlist today, where you can drag and drop songs in seconds. No, this was an art form. You had to wait for each song to come on the radio or record it from another cassette, then rewind, fast forward, and line everything up perfectly. And there was no skipping a track. Once you recorded a song, it was there, set in stone, unless you were willing to go through the hassle of taping over it. But that was the beauty of it. A mixtape was a commitment. It took time, effort, and heart. If someone made one for you, you knew they put thought into every song. It wasn't just music, it was a message, a story, a piece of someone's soul wrapped up in a little plastic cassette. Of course, tapes had their quirks. Remember when the tape got chewed up in the player? You'd hear that awful screeching sound, and your heart would sink as you pulled the cassette out, hoping the tape wasn't too tangled. But if it was, you knew the trick. You grabbed a pencil, stuck it in the spool, and carefully wound the tape back in place. Sometimes it worked perfectly, and sometimes you were left with a warbled, damaged song, but at least you tried. And let's not forget the battle of finding a blank tape. You'd rummage through your collection, looking for a tape with enough space, only to realize you'd have to tape over something. And if you taped over an old favorite by accident, that was a heartbreak like no other. Recording songs from the radio was a game of patience and dedication, but when you finally had your perfect mix, it was worth every second. That feeling of popping your custom tape into your Walkman, pressing play, and hearing your collection of songs in your order, that was something special. It was personal, it was satisfying, it was a little victory. And though today's music streaming is effortless, there's something about those days that can't be replaced. Maybe it was the anticipation, the thrill of catching the perfect recording, or the sense of accomplishment when the tape was finally filled. Whatever it was, it made music feel more valuable, more treasure, more hours. And if you still have an old cassette tucked away somewhere, take a moment, hold it in your hands, and remember the magic of recording songs from the radio, because those were the days. Life has changed so much over the years. Some of these things we miss, some we might be glad to leave behind, but they all played a part in our lives. So how many of these things do you remember? Did we miss any? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your memories. And if you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.